Hey there, everyone. This is Dave Dubeau with another episode of the Property Profits Real Estate Podcast. And today we're going to have a lot of fun because we've got a friend from down under who now lives up over in the US of A. And it is Mr. Reed Goossens, originally from Australia. How are you doing, Reed?
G'day, mate. How's it going?
It's going great. So Reed is a very interesting gentleman because in 2012, he quit his job and packed up and left Australia, moved to the United States, started from scratch with very little money, no credit in the States, no job, and jumped right into real estate investing, got into multifamily real estate investing and has just blown it right up. And I believe, if memory serves me right, Reed, that you are controlling about $120 million worth of properties. Is that?
That is correct at last count, and trying to add more to the portfolio every single day.
Oh, that's great. Well, I'm looking forward to our conversation, Reed, because a lot of our listeners are Canadians, and everybody's always enticed by the idea of investing in the States, and we see some of the property prices in different areas of the States and compare that to what stuff's selling for in Canada, and it's just it boggles our minds. So tell us a little bit about how did you make that transition? What sparked that move from Australia to the States in the first place?
Yeah, very good question. So in 2009, this is before moving to the United States, picked up the book Rich Dad, Poor Dad, very influential. I studied civil engineering and structural engineering, had spent 2 years abroad, and halfway through 2009, 2010, I moved back to Australia after spending 2 awesome years, gallivanting around the world. Throughout that trip, I met a beautiful girl, American girl, who subsequently moved to Australia, and then we moved back to the United States in 2012. But in the sort of interim, I got very hungry and itchy feet of I didn't want to live and work in a cubicle for the rest of my life, even though structural engineering and civil engineering is a great job, very well paid, but knew I needed to do more with my life. Mm-hmm. And also really, really wanted to live in New York City. So the two things, I fell in love with New York City, but also fell in love with a girl who she's now my wife, Miss Erica Rhino. Well, she's not Miss anymore, but my wife Erica. And so we moved to the United States in early 2012. She'd finished her master's degree in Australia. She is American, but she came out to Aussie for a period of time, and then I just quit my job and said, "Hey man, let's do it. Let's give this thing a go." And we moved halfway across the world.
Every single Aussie I know has that itchy foot. They got to travel. That's
yep.
So good on you. Okay, so you were. That's a big leap from reading Rich Dad to owning 120 or controlling $120 million worth of multifamily properties. Did you jump right into multifamily investing as soon as you got off the boat, so to speak?
Yeah, so a little bit to what your point you're saying about earlier in the introduction of the show is when I first moved to the United States, so prior to moving to the US, I was going to do something in Australia. I was attending a lot of real estate investing courses, really self-education. It was going to do a flip or a lease option. The Australian market is very similar probably to the Canadian market, very high prices, high barriers to entry, compressed, very small metropolitans in the general scheme of things compared to the United States. I think we only got 25 million people. I think Canada says 35 million, maybe 10 million people more. Anyway, so huge barriers to entry. Cash flow is not a thing. And then when I moved to the US, I moved to New York and just found that these sort of what I call tier 2 and tier 3 markets that penciled really, really well. And I had to learn and teach myself how to the American lingo, what's a cap rate, what's an IRR, what's credit and all that sort of stuff. So coming fresh off the boat, I had to start again in the United States and quickly realized I couldn't borrow money because I was fresh off the boat. So I bought my first property within 6 months of moving to the US. It was actually a triplex, but I bought it for $38,000 in upstate New York. And it sounds great, and you shake your head, but it also was a pain in the ass. and I subsequently got rid of it and ended up scaling up and got into less risky out of Section 8 housing. And I'm sure some of your probably guests have spoken a little bit about Section 8 housing here in the United States. But we've got a very good thrown in the deep end, got started. The old saying, you don't get to deal number 10 without doing deal number 1. And that deal number 1 was a triplex in upstate New York. So back to your question. Yes, I did start with multifamily, but wasn't as large as what I'm doing today.
Well, no, I wouldn't expect it was. So did you get off the boat with a boatload of money, or how did you? What did you do to?
Not a boatload of money. I think I saved about 40 grand, and again, that 40 grand was saved over the first 5 years of professional work, and I was going to do with that money, I was going to do a flip in Australia or something with it to get started in real estate. I obviously ended up moving to the United States. That took a little bit of it out of there because moving halfway across the world costs money. So I bought the thing all cash, and then I was able to develop local relationships with the local banks, and over a period of about 6 months, opened a bank account at a local bank, and it was called First Niagara Bank in upstate New York. I don't think they're existing anymore. But over a period of time, I was able to develop that relationship, show that I was depositing rental checks, and then they gave me a line of credit like 25 grand or 30 grand. And I was able to buy deal number 2 with that. Again, very cheap property, but jaw-droppingly cheap. Quickly realized why they were so cheap. But it was really, again, more the fact that I got started rather than just, nose stuck in a book reading about real estate. It's like that thing you don't read about. You don't get buffed by reading about going to the gym. You got to go to the gym. So it's the same sort of thing.
Is that true?
Yeah, apparently.
Yeah. That explains it bigger too.
Just keep looking at it, right?
Yeah. Keep visualizing.
Yeah.
Okay, so walk us through, going from those crappy little multis that got your feet wet and you self-finance, you did your own. When did you start bringing on investor partners, or when did you start? I know, as you mentioned before we jumped on live, that you're big into syndication. So how did that whole process kind of start?
Well, to all your Canadian listeners, there's actually a very good buddy of mine, using the Canadian term. He was a Canadian friend of mine that we'd study university in Australia. He came out to New York in late 2013. I think I had 3 properties at that stage, but still working full time. And he really, I was like, oh man, I've owned like 8 units or whatever it was. The sum total of, maybe $250,000 worth of real estate in upstate New York. And he said, oh, that's great. Well done. I just closed on a 70 unit. And I said, what, 70? And he's like, yeah, 70 units. I was like, how the hell did you do that? And he's like, well, I pooled a bunch of money from friends and family, and I got a seller carryback financing. And I was like, whoa, I'm writing all this down really quickly. And he was actually the guy that kickstarted it all. And I also realized in myself within the 6 to 12 months of first moving to the United States that I really reached the end of my tether pretty quickly. I didn't have any more money. Banks weren't really lending to me because the fact was I was still fresh off the boat building that credit. So I really had to focus on syndication. And I was like, what's this syndication? What's, other people's money? What's OPM? All that sort of jazz that you hear about. And through that one conversation, I went and got a mentor who was based here in the United States. And through that, I was able to build a brand. And I built the brand Investing in the US, which is another podcast on iTunes. And it was in and around my story about moving to the United States, because back in 2012, 2013, there's a lot of people trying to buy turnkey real estate in the United States. And, just explaining, how to get credit and all that sort of stuff, and how to get started, and what's an LLC and what's an ITIN number and blah, blah, blah. And through that platform, I was able to attract investors, and through that, I was able to raise money on larger multifamily, because with larger multifamily, I was able to move the NOI and the net operating income, and through moving the net operating income, I was able to force the appreciation, which really resonated with me. Compared to doing on the triplex and the duplexes, you might bump the rent by $100 or $150 a month, but that's not really forcing. You only got 3 units, so your scale just isn't there.
Yeah.
So, that's really in a nutshell how I got started.
Interesting. Very interesting. Okay, so now that you've been in the game for quite a while, you've got the podcast going, all that kind of good stuff. What are some of the biggest mistakes that you see people wanting to get into multifamily investing doing? What kind of mistakes? Where are they screwing up?
Look, there's everyone's going to have a different journey. I think the big thing that people, and to my point, myself included, when I first moved to the US, I was very in awe of the amount of free information that was out there, like compared to back in Australia, where I would have had to pay a guru $6,000 or $10,000 to be mentored by them. And it took me a couple of years to get to that point where I was like, okay, I need to get a mentor because I need to ride on his coattails to get to where I want to be. And so not necessarily a mistake, but just maybe a delaying of the inevitable that I ended up going down that path. And for many, many years, I was like, oh, screw that. I don't need a mentor. I don't need to pay for someone to tell me what to do. But like any good coach, the coach of the Toronto Raptors obviously did very, very well just recently. Yeah. They need people there to teach them, to sort of guide them along their journey. And regardless if you're Steph Curry or some of the big names in the Raptors, you still need a coach to as I said, steer the ship in the right direction. So delaying getting a mentor, and I think a mentor is really important. And regardless of what your thoughts are on it, surrounding yourself with other people who have been successful, even if you don't pay for mentorship, just being around other successful people helps you in your own way get to that success in which you want to achieve in your life. So that's probably the biggest thing that I see people stumbling on and thinking they've got to do it all by themselves, where in fact there's a lot of resources out there, free resources that you can leverage quite well in order to get going and get your first deal done, because you don't get to deal number 10 without doing deal number 1, right?
Exactly. No, definitely. Now, you mentioned that your Rich Dad Poor Dad was a big influence on you, as it has been on me and gazillions of other real estate investors.
Right.
One of Kiyosaki's other books was titled Your Unfair Advantage, where he basically says each one of us has at least one, if not multiple, unfair advantages. What would you say yours is, Reed?
My unfair advantage. Look, I've always been brought up with the notion of being acutely aware of what a dollar is worth and how to create a dollar through either sweat equity or just rolling up the sleeves. I do remember being, just legally, I think it was 13 and a half in Australia to get a first job, and I was, as soon as I turned 13 in 6 months, I was at the local grocery store. Please give me a job. Please give me a job. And my parents all, come from, moderate means. They're both school teachers back in Australia. And my dad always said to me, a fool and their money are easily parted. And, I didn't grow up without, but I didn't grow up in luxury. And so I always was instilled in me to work hard and to don't be afraid to roll up the sleeves. And get a bit dirty, get dirt under your nails. I remember, doing many jobs throughout summers back at university and high school, where I'm glad I chose the path of being at university and getting a degree and all that sort of stuff. But I was also not afraid to get a bit dirty and get a bit sweaty. So I don't think there's no unfair advantage. I'm not naturally. I'm a B student. I wasn't an A student, but I never gave up. Probably my unfair advantage is resilience, and even if you do fail, you get back up on the horse and keep going again. You're going to dust your knees. Things are going to happen over time, and you've got to understand, where you're going to go wrong and try to foresee that coming. But if you do, have a few dusts up, then keep going, keep pushing.
Well, that's a good point, because I find that a lot of people, as soon as we become adults, we develop this intense fear of failure, or more like fear of looking stupid in front of other people. I think that's what it really boils down to. So any suggestions on how to get out of that? Because it holds so many people back.
Yeah, I'm going to forget the name of this book, but I was listening to a podcast where it talks, there's a book that talks about harnessing your inner child. When you're a child, it's like, well, why can't I do that, Dad? Or why can't I do that, Mum? Or why can't I just go over there and the big questions that were very simplified in a child's mind. And it's sort of, the book was called, I think, Harnessing Your Inner Child as an Entrepreneur. And again, letting go of the shackles of, what people think and these mindsets and the way in which we've been taught and brought up. And I think the biggest thing is it's a little bit to do with ego, and it's a little bit to do with not thinking that we've arrived as adults. I know everything. I'm an adult. I should have my quote unquote SHIT together, and that then in turn produces this sort of weird dichotomy of like, well, I can't go and take that risk because of so and so. My parents told me this, and that. So I think trying to understand that harnessing your inner child, but also continuing to learn and not being afraid to continue to learn. And I think as entrepreneurs in this world of things are so drastically and rapidly changing, we've really got to be like a surfer, like ride the wave of change and be okay with change, and not just have the blinkers on and go down the path of that's been, well traveled. Try and blaze your own path if you can, and do things a little differently. So yeah.
Yeah, well said. Definitely. So Reed, a lot of Canadians are interested in investing down in the States. Do you have any, it's too big to get into a lot of depth, but any tips or suggestions on how to get their feet wet, on how to make that first step into investing in the United States?
Yeah, well, I think the big thing is the first step you need to do is understand what market and what you want to invest in, right? So a lot of Australians, a lot of Canadians are looking south of the border and saying, okay, hey, there's all this great cash flow, right? So you really got to define what do you want out of US investments. Secondly, you got to then look at like what is going to be the best markets to invest in from north of the border, right? You're going to be investing out of the country. So, choose a market where you may have a bit of a competitive advantage. Maybe you've got a relative there or a friend there or someone who can share information that because you live in Canada, you don't necessarily know that, being south of Smith Street is bad or being north of Smith Street is bad. So trying to harness your network of people who do live in the United States. Once you've chosen a market or a couple of markets, really, I always encourage people to underwrite a minimum of 50 deals in any one market, because that is a great desktop study on getting to know the market without actually being boots on the ground. And then you get to, and then the third thing is reaching out to local brokers, local partners. If you can partner with anyone boots on the ground, I highly recommend doing it, because it will then incentivize the person who's on the ground. It's, they're part of the deal. You both got shared interests, right? And so you don't have to necessarily worry if it's just your deal that's, thousands of kilometers away, and sort of set it and forget it, but no one's really looking over it. Mm. So there's a couple of things there that you definitely need to do. First, I'll repeat that if people miss that, is, trying to see what markets you want to invest in. What are you investing for? Really, what was your ultimate goal here, and what's your value for investing in real estate in the United States? And seeing if you can try and find a local boots on the ground partner. As the process goes along, I always recommend that people go and visit and touch and feel the markets. And you may have to do it a couple of times. But if you're going to invest a large sum of money, spending a couple of $100 on a flight and accommodation for due diligence, just to make sure that you got the right investment, is small change compared to losing your shirt. So yeah.
Oh, it's definitely. So Reed, I believe you've got a book about investing in the U.S. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, I do. For those people who are watching, it's called Investing in the U.S. It's the same name as my podcast. It's called it's named The Ultimate Guide to U.S. Real Estate. And what it is really all the best episodes that I thought are really good, jam-packed into a step-by-step guide for people who want to invest here. Now, this is for both foreigners and local people. It's in and around my story. I talk a lot about how to find markets. I talk a lot about how to get set up here in the United States legally as an international investor. It's probably the only chapter, I think it's like chapter 6, that I talk a little bit about, bank accounts and, LLCs and all that sort of great stuff. And then I talk about, how to underwrite deals, and then how to develop out your team on boots on the ground in order for you to be successful. And then I talk a little bit about syndication, and then go on to talk a little bit about the tax strategies with 1031, if people aren't aware of that, why they're so great in order to leverage up and scale your to create, I should say, long-term wealth. So if anyone is interested, please reach out. I'm more than happy to shoot them a free PDF copy if they've listened to your show. I
appreciate that. And if people want to find out more about you, Reed, what's the best way for them to do that?
The best way is just to head over to my website. It's reedgoossens.com. It's a bit of a doozy, reedgoossens.com, reedgoossens.com. Everything, all the links are going to be there. All the contact information's there. If people are ever coming through Los Angeles, because that's where I live, and they want to talk, catch up for a beer or coffee or lunch, I'm always willing to make some time for people, particularly my Canadian brothers north of the border, and we can have a few jokes and laughs about the Americans at the same time.
That sounds like a good plan. All right, Reed. Very nice to meet you. Thanks for your time on the podcast today.
Thanks, mate.
All right, everybody. Take care. See you next time. Bye-bye.
Well, thanks very much for checking out the Property Profits podcast. And if you like what we're doing here, please head on over to iTunes, subscribe, rate us, and leave us a review. Be very, very much appreciated. And if you're looking to create a regular flow of inbound investor inquiries about your real estate deals, then I invite you to attend one of my upcoming live online demonstrations. And you can check that out at investorattractiondemo.com. Take care.